So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to present the book and go through some of the images, and then we'll get Mark up here, and who knows what will happen once Mark's on stage. I've learned not to predict. The discussion may involve Blotter, it may involve rabbits or JFK. You never really know with Mark McCloud. I'm a little bit more predictable because I wrote the book, and so it's in my brain. I was, here, so there you see the cover there. Now we're going to go to, if you don't know, oh, geez, what happened there? That's not so good. Come on, baby. What the heck? Whoa, there we go. Huh. Hopefully that doesn't keep happening. It might, and I'm not going to fuck with it. So this, if you don't know him, is Mr. Mark McCloud. And while I did write this book, and it took a lot of time and energy and was a lot of fun, it would not exist if it were not for Mark McCloud. And Mark McCloud's decision in the early 1980s to start squirreling away examples of street LSD blotter and keeping it, a practice that eventually led him to start putting the blotters behind frames, which he said had two major positive features. One is it made them look more like art, and you were actually able to see that this ephemeral piece of drug paraphernalia that is designed solely to be consumed and therefore to no longer exist on the planet actually has a sort of value in itself. And by putting it behind a frame, you can see that. And the other value of putting it behind a frame is that it's a hassle to eat it. So you keep them, which was a factor. Hopefully, please cooperate. Thank you. So I'm just going to go through here. I got a little bit of a talk. So here we got a really beautiful silkscreen piece of honoring Albert Hofmann, who becomes an important figure in a lot of blotter art. But it's important to think a little bit about LSD as a drug before thinking about what makes blotter so interesting. And LSD is unlike other compounds in that it's incredibly powerful at a very, very small microgram level. So when Hofmann was going to try out this weird drug that seemed to give him a little bit of a psychoactive feel, he said, okay, I'm gonna lowball it. I'm gonna make it super safe. 250 mics. This is not going to do anything because most things work at a 250 milligram level or 150. Whatever. MDMA is 150. Advil's 100. Whatever. It's like we're in the milligram land, and so he's bringing it down a whole order of magnitude. Still had a rolling good trip, but this means that it's actually kind of a hassle to deal with LSD in itself because it's so small. Like you got a little pile of 250 micrograms. That's like a pain in the butt. And if you get it off a little bit, then, well, all sorts of things can happen. So it's the problem of how do you actually distribute it? Oh, this is really annoying. Oh, well. So this is an example of how some of the early distribution occurred with when Sandoz was marketing LSD as illicit. And this came in a little powder, 225 milligrams, so you've got to break that one up. But what this leads to is all these this problem of like, what is the appropriate medium for LSD? Like LSD, you're not going to take it straight, some people did, but generally, no, you need a medium. So this is I like this cover because it reminds us of two different media from the 1960s. The title of this great book, of course, refers to Kool-Aid and the idea of just putting liquid LSD and taking it as a liquid and diluting it sufficiently so you don't lose your mind, at least too directly. And the other one, of course, is the sugar cube manifested. Sugar cubes were big deals in the 60s. Again, you'd have a pipette with liquid in it. You know roughly what a drop was. Put a drop in. Sometimes they colored it blue so you would know the ones that had already been dosed or not. Obviously, that problem happened a lot. But eventually, towards the end of the 1960s, and people dosed everything with acid, hair, Pez, mushrooms, whatever. They would just, because you could put it on almost anything. Somebody figured out, oh yeah, you can put it on blotting paper. And this is an example of the first mechanically produced LSD blotter from the hands of a character illegal, yes. Although there wasn't any legal blotter before then, I think. Anyway, So we're going to get, but that peanut gallery, that peanut man over there is Mark McCloud, ladies and gentlemen. It will not be his last comment. So I would tune in to the back of the room as well as the front. This device sped up the process of dosing individual hits of blotter paper, which otherwise you'd have to do manually, one drop at a time, and obviously not controlling that drop particularly well. And this device had 100 pins on a block, and the pins would be dropped into a bath of acid and at one shot brought over to a small business card size piece of cardstock and impregnated with the drops of LSD that way. And so these were simple, they were not designed. But of course, eventually, soon enough, people went, we're handing out pieces of paper. Why don't we put pictures on them? This early piece is a good example because it features the two most significant elements of LSD blotter aesthetics. On the one hand, you have abstraction. You have a grid, a plain old simple grid. And this grid was very handy because it told you, the purchaser of this, say, sheet of LSD, where to cut in order to establish the individual hits. And so the gesture of abstraction runs throughout blotter aesthetics because of the power of the grid and the necessity of the grid. Eventually, the grid goes from being a printed image to being impregnated in the paper itself through perforations. So in the mid-'70s, when some nameless genius decided to perforate LSD, they said, well, we don't need a picture of the grid. Let's put the grid inside the paper by adding perforations. But the logic of the grid continues to inform acid aesthetics so that even when you have blotters that have a single large-scale image on the whole sheet, they tend to also refer to the individual hit or perhaps to a cluster of four because the grid and the repetitive grid is kind of not essential to the form, but it's one of the key elements that you'll see over and over again. The other image is just an image, a symbol, a figure, a picture, usually figurative. Animals, superheroes, cartoons, mystical landscapes, religious iconography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A myriad of kinds of images. I mentioned perforation before. This is an example of a DIY perf machine. This machine was originally for drying laundry, old school, squeezing out the wet clothes. They used all sorts of different things in order to create the perf boards. You can take them into a copy shop, but after a while they figure out what you're doing. So unless they're on the take, you kind of have to do it yourself. So people would use the edges of aluminum foil containers. They take those off and make those into a grid board. Some people just use like pizza cutters or knives to cut out the perforations. So there was a lot of DIY going on. This is not one of the first blotters, but it refers to one of arguably the first printed blotter that we know about, which had Mr. Natural on it. So this is a later iteration of Mr. Natural, because one thing also about blotter is that it's all about copying. Copy, 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 copy. Each individual sheet, copy, 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 copy. All the drugs are on it, copy, copy of the same drug, same drug, same drug. And then you go, oh wait, we put a Mr. Natural out, people liked it. Let's do another Mr. Natural. Let's make it the same, make it a little bit different. No, an entirely different one, but still Mr. Natural. So there's a lot of copying going on. And Mr. Natural is just the perfect icon for LSD blotter. It's just great because it's it refers to underground countercultural print culture. You got this classic iconic character, a character who is simultaneously spiritual, holy, outside of the mainstream society, and a rake, someone you would not trust with your daughter. So it kind of captures the sacred profane dynamic of LSD, which to my mind is the most important aesthetic and kind of spiritual dimension of LSD, even in contrast with other sacred medicines. It has a particular flavor of sacred and profane. I'm going to skip by this one, and we're going to go... I'm just going to start exploring some images. These are images that related to the kind of tradition of underground print culture, because in a way, LSD Blotter is just more underground print culture. So like the way that they use offset printers and silk screens to make posters and alternative newspapers and underground comics and all this sort of print culture that helped define counterculture as a sort of space, of a media space. That same sort of logic, albeit shrunk down to a much smaller size, is lying behind Blotter, which kind of comes a little bit later than all of those print media that I just mentioned, really rising up in the late 70s and hitting its golden age, its stride in the 1980s and 1990s. But here's some examples. This is from a Rick Griffin panel from the third Zap. So it shows the kind of connection between them. These are a number of images, Mouse and Kelly images for record covers. So again, some of that classic countercultural iconography. I'm going to skip this one. This, of course, is a mighty piece. One little bit of sort of iconographic lore is that particular bolt of lightning tends to actually mean, at least in blotter formats, acid itself. That is LSD. So what we're looking at here is not just a groovy skeleton that has like this cool flash of lightning. It's like a skeleton on LSD. And there's a whole, that ties in with white lightning and the whole Owsley tradition. And here's an example of the way that a lot of blotter art kind of wittily refers to the medium in ways that most people eating it probably don't get, is that this is, even though it's not a 13-pointer, this is very much referring to the same icon of the LSD lightning bolt, except they're doing it in the superhero language of Shazam. So it's a beautiful piece. I mean, it's like incredible street art. The sort of graffiti-like echo of the dimensionality is extraordinary. The reference to simultaneously to superheroes and to acid, it's just brilliant. That's one hit, yeah. So that's why it's got the nice hairy edges to it. So a lot of these images were actually already produced by Mark and his assistants when they went through his archive and scanned some, and many of them received this beautiful high, what's that? Yeah, almost all of these are from, they're all from his collection in some way or the other. As we march along, there we go. This is just, now I'm just going to kind of wander through, so it's kind of like, what is the image going to become from? What's it like? What's it, it could be anything. You could put anything on it. And I call it kind of a meta medium, because the medium is actually the paper. That's the carrier device, or the drug, the medium for the drug. And then when you decide to put an image on top of this piece of paper, you're kind of like adding another layer of media to this already existing medium. But like, what are you going to put on it? I mean, this is the thing to remember about Blotter. You do not need images on Blotter to sell them. Some people prefer to manufacture a blank blotter. Some people prefer to buy blank blotter. You don't need the images. The images are completely superfluous. They exist, well, you put it, you make a stab at it as a brand, a joke, a little mini comic book, a sacred icon, a in-joke that nobody gets except other people in the trade. All of these things and more are part of the iconography of Blotter. And this, for example, is a classic image from Ceremonial Magic, from a book from the 19th century. Any ceremonial magician would recognize the density of this. Is this impregnating the acid with some kind of esoteric intention? I don't know. This is a beautiful piece of UFOs, and I love it because even though arguably the person wasn't thinking about how cool it looked as a full sheet, that is part of the aesthetics of Blotter, that there's something beautiful about the full sheet, even though most people who are eating it don't see the full sheet. They see a subset, they see a 10 strip, they see a hit. But this one looks really extraordinary in a very kind of Andy Warhol way. And the echo is important because when Warhol paints all those Campbell soup cans, it's the same idea of like manufacturing, repetition, consumer iconography, copying. It's the same kind of logic that goes into this blotter art, which is very modern. It's a modern drug and it's a modern art. It's not reaching back to the indigenous past. It's very much a creature of the contemporary. Speaking of creatures of the contemporary, this is one of the funniest, cutest ones, a classic from the late 1970s. And hey, Mark, this was still 250, right? We were still in bigger doses. This isn't a disco dose yet, right? Yeah. So one of the things that happens what's that? Yeah, right. There's a bunch of arcane math. I will spare you. But a very significant thing happens in the late 1970s, which is that the families who control the production of LSD and the upper edge of the distribution networks more or less got together and said, hey, let's lower the dose. There's a lot of benefits to lowering the dose. People are less likely to freak out, less blowback to us. It's easier to manage. You make a little more money. That's the way to go, and they did it. So the average intensity of a single hit changes dramatically. Yeah, Disney was not happy about this, as you can imagine. But from an art point of view, you can say, hey, baby, that's just appropriation. We do that all the time. It's like a punk rock flyer. It's like Andy Warhol. He's just appropriating images from pop culture. Why can't these guys do it? So, and then just again to emphasize how the point I was making about you don't need images is that the images are superfluous, which means they just exist to give you some extra something. Like it's not functional. It's not like they need to do it to make the money. It's not like a brand on an Advil. We're like, oh, we need to identify our product. It's like a gift. It's like a kind of excess. And here you see even more some of the excesses that those Mickeys would come, the sheets, a stack of 10 would come wrapped up inside that foil, which has a little Sandoz figure on it. And then that foil was inside of a box that has this other layer. And that's, if you bought a gram, that's what you'd get. You don't need that. It's for art, for fun, for the goofiness of the trade, for the beauty of the trade. Correct. You want to come up here, Mark? I mean, if you come up here, then you can. Well, can you guys hear him when he rambles? It's a little harder. If you come up here, it's more fun. If you're gonna peanut gallery, you might as well come up here. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, you'll see. You'll get him in a moment. I'm not going to do too much more of this. So I did mention that, in a way, Blotter hits its stride in the 1980s, and there's another important factor to that, which is that. In general, we think of what are the high points of psychedelic history, the 60s, the late 60s, the 70s, maybe the early 70s, maybe the mid-70s. By the end of the 70s, psychedelic culture, other than the Grateful Dead, where is it exactly? But the thing about Blotter is that Blotter takes off when official visible psychedelic culture declines. So the imagery on Blotter is actually a much more rich and interesting kind of exploration of the different subcultural meanings that acid takes on in the 1980s and the 1990s, because people don't stop eating LSD. It might go up and down over the years, but it continues to be used inside punk cultures, inside industrial cultures, inside pagan cultures. There's a lot of different subcultures that are eating acid, but it doesn't have the same classic, nostalgic, psychedelic twist. And so here's a good example of this is from the hardcore band Rich Kids on LSD. This is their Beanie Boy character. Here's another example of two kind of classic images. I think the Conan came out around the time of the movie in the early 80s, 1982, I believe. And then this is, of course, J.R. Bob Dobbs' Church of Subgenius, which kind of captures, again, some of the sarcastic edge that you find in a fair amount of Blotter. Kind of a humorous, sort of snarky quality that is really more of a feature of kind of punk rock attitude than classic hippie good vibes. This is a couple of pieces from a really brilliant manufacturer and blotter maker in San Francisco, and who lived in the Castro. No, his street name was Grandpa, and this is, yes, the rainbow flag. He was friends with Gilbert. Come on. Ooh. Oh, I hate it. Gilbert X, who came up with the rainbow flag when he was high, by the way, at a party. So he was on acid at a glitter party in the Castro, and he went, the rainbow flag! And then created the rainbow flag, and this is the rainbow flag LSD. This is some more Grandpa stuff that is really quite charming. Notice the little leather daddy down there at the bottom. It's got a little bit of a Village People vibe, but quite a lovely piece. This is another wonderful piece of the dancing test tubes. And this again kind of suggests the ways that some of the imagery in blotters, it comes out of very canny references to other features of drug culture at the time. So if you were in San Francisco in the late 1970s or the early 1980s, and you saw this dancing test tube and you were an active and informed drug user, you would go, oh, that's the guy from Farm Chem. And Farm Chem was the first outfit that did anonymous drug testing anywhere in the country. And they kept doing it for quite a long time. And of course, they have their little happy little logo there. So he's just like, yeah, let's take this logo and run with it. So it kind of shows the way that history and the kind of subcultural meanings are impregnated in a lot of these pieces. This is a lovely piece from the hand of Acid Erik and the Dutch blotter maker Ed Visse, or Ed Visser, that's how you pronounce it, Ed Visser. Made around the time the wall came down, so maybe it had a little esoteric meaning in there. This is another piece from Ed Visser, and one of the things I like about his pieces is that they look a little different. They look kind of European. I don't know what that means, but they have a different vibe. And he was making a lot of posters for Club Paradiso, a really important club in Amsterdam. And actually being able to talk to him was one of the great hits of the book. You know, we did our best to talk to blotter makers for obvious reasons. They're a little bit hard to find. They don't necessarily want to talk to you. But Ed is kind of out and about, reprinting, selling some of his old stock and reprinting pieces under the head of the Amsterdam Blotter Company. He's a great guy, and so we were able to connect with him and get a little bit of his story, which also appears in the book. And if we're talking European, there we go. Cartoons are a major part of the blotter iconography, but that's not surprising. There's a lot of cartoons. There's a lot of superheroes, but there's also, and this is the most interesting to me, a lot of animals. So think about why. That's kind of cool. Why there's a lot of animals. So this is another Visser piece, but this is his most famous. Many of you have probably seen this image. I just saw it. I was at Esalen. Someone had a motorcycle jacket with a lot of patches on it, and this guy showed up on one of the patches. It was originally made for another honoring of Albert Hofmann. Of course, it's the bike ride. And this piece is actually pretty interesting because Visser was annoyed at the copying thing that I mentioned earlier, because of course if there's a popular piece of LSD that it's charismatic and people like it, it's very easy for a rival crew to print the same image and put different material on it. And he found this irritating. So he tried to start adding little tricks to make it more difficult to copy. So in this one, it is mostly printed, offset printing. So you're printing a bunch to make it. The only way to make it economical is you're going to print 1,000 copies or something. But then to add a little twist, he silk screened the numbers. So and they're different colors. He used like what do you call rainbow, whatever, Mark? Huh? Yeah, but there's another name for it. Anyway, you get to alter the colors to make it more difficult to print, to copy. So now we're kind of moving into the 90s. Some of you could probably remember this figure. Again, appropriated perhaps with the approval of the rave shop, Liquid Sky. Another classic, this is an example of the way in which the blotter format gets appropriated, not for drug distribution. This is an absolutely fabulous record, one of the great, minimal techno psychedelic masterpieces. And that's the sheet and the CD cover. So if you so some people got pulled over and the cops would look at it and hold them for a couple of days. It's like, no, it's a CD. Blah, blah, blah. So it's a funny blend, which starts getting funnier as the time goes along. Another super classic piece from the 90s. This, of course, is an early Alex Gray. It was purchased by none other than Mr. Mark McCloud, who subsequently gave it to his mother, who was a devout Catholic. I think there's both humor and beauty in that acid way, sacred, profane. And then subsequently, without the artist's knowledge, it became somehow it transformed somehow into a legendary sheet in early 90s Grateful Dead scene. Say it again, Mark? Yeah. So that's a beautiful piece, and so it allowed people to go around Grateful Dead parking lots going, anybody got Jesus? So here's an interesting piece where you start to see things shift. One of the things that we've gone through, a little time snap that we've gone through here that has not been announced. That is exactly the one that Casey got popped with. Is at the end of the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s was the emergence of what most people now call vanity blotter, or blotter that is produced primarily as an artifact of trade, a kind of surface to collect, a collectible object, rather than a drug delivery device. But of course, it's necessarily a bit ambiguous. One of the fun things about the book is I tell the whole story of where vanity blotter comes from. The term itself belongs to Mark McCloud, whose second trial played a very instrumental role in the emergence of vanity blotter, because to boil down the complicated trial to one little takeaway is that Mark's defense turned on the question of why somebody would have 30,000 pieces of drug paraphernalia in their house, even if none of them had LSD on them. Well, the answer, or the answer offered by his rather brilliant attorney, was that these were pieces of art. And there was already a market in undipped blotter that had been emerging, again, in the late 1990s. And so this was his escape ticket. This got him out. And so, but it also, as soon as the word got out, everyone's like, wait, you can sell blotter without acid on it, and it's art? Boom! Let's start a market. And so from that, you get this explosion of great art and crappy copies done with, Xeroxes and terrible ink and, the whole everything in between. It becomes a free-for-all of what blotter is. And so this piece is designed as a piece of vanity blotter by John Hanna and Stevie Postman for the Mind States conferences, which were some really wonderful conferences in the 2000s or late 90s, 2000s psychedelic conferences. And John Hanna tells an interesting story about this, which is that they print them up, they're sold, they're signed by some of the heavyweights, and so some of the ones that got signed by famous LSD Illuminati go on to raise a lot of money for MAPS, for heroin, and even now they occasionally appear. And then at some point, John is like looking for them online or something. He's just hunting around online, and it says, Mind States, the brain is excellent. He's like, excellent, what does that mean? And then he looks at it more, and they're talking about the acid on it. And so it turns out that some people would buy them and then dose them. So it went outside the underground and then back inside the underground. And indeed, when our friend Casey Hardison was busted, he was holding a great deal of this blotter. So here's some other examples of vanity. This is a very entertaining one, a big hit in the late 2000s or the late aughts, and yeah, it's kind of in a way, it's a classic image because it's more of the cartoon language, but made up in a really beautiful way. This one captures some of the lowbrow, scandalous quality of a lot of blotter imagery. This is the kind of thing you wouldn't have seen 20 years earlier, probably, even though some of that stuff did have a little bit of a demented quality. This is full dement, and also, very much done by an artist, Zoltron. He signs it, he sells it with his name on it. So it changes, in a way, the kind of meaning of these pieces because they're not intended to be dipped, and some of them aren't very good for dipping. Some of them are, but they always have that possibility. So we're winding up here. Just have a couple more. Some of them, because they're so gunked up with unnecessary gloop. So if you're overprinting the piece, it's just not as favorable. It can work. It's not like it doesn't work, but it's not elegant, let's put it that way, or supportive, maybe. This is another great art piece by Joe Roberts, where again he's like riffing on the history of the medium, playing. You see the Mickey, you see the Steely, and a lot of the smaller pieces are also. It was part of his weird iconography. He's got his whole sort of psychedelic, conspiratorial, playful thing, and I think this might have been done around the time that the CERN, was going to destroy the world with their antiparticle. But it might have been before that too. I'm not sure exactly when it comes from. But it's called Green CERN. Here's another thing I really like about Vanity Blotter is that earlier street blotter, it occasionally refers to Albert Hofmann, but it usually doesn't actually talk about acid history per se. It's more just playing with different images and icons, often that aren't particularly psychedelic or only become psychedelic in the context, like one that has Mr. Clean. Remember the Procter and Gamble guy, the little genie, Mr. Clean. But on acid, that's kind of funny because it's clean. They're advertising clean LSD, so it's kind of funny. But on itself, it's not particularly psychedelic. But Vanity Blotter starts to kind of remember and reconstruct the history of acid in some interesting ways. This, for example, anybody recognize this fellow? Nick Sand, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Classic, very, very important key figure in LSD manufacturer and a real character as well, and such a beautiful portrait, really capturing all the kind of echoey, labyrinthine mirroring of LSD. Anybody else? Yeah, good. I'm glad everybody knows Doc Ellis. It's really important to know Doc Ellis' story when he wakes up in 1970 and drops a hit, and then discovers that he's pitching that day, and goes on to pitch a no-hitter, which unfortunately was not recorded, but we all can sort of imagine it in our minds, what exactly he's doing to the pitch, to the batters to make them not bad. But again, it's another way of memorializing LSD history. These are just two more pieces I just particularly like. That are specifically blotter pieces. Sometimes people make art and then they put it on blotter and they put it on posters and they put it on skateboard decks, and that's cool. But some pieces are made specifically with blotter in mind, and this is one from the Houston artist Patrick Turk. And I love it also because it riffs on this theme that I already mentioned of copying, which is not just a way of talking about blotter art, which relies on a lot of copying often, but also some of the features of acid phenomenology, particularly trails. So you're just, in a way, you're kind of just getting copies of your hand as you see like a trail running through the sky. And he's kind of playing with that in a way that's both beautiful and a little sinister and creepy, like a little insectoid. So I really love this piece. And the final one, which I wish was less resonant, this piece was made quite a while ago. But unfortunately, it is still quite resonant. This is Stella's piece. What does she call it? Do you remember the name of this, Mark? Hey, Mark, you remember the name? Yeah, it's in the book. I'll dig it out. Actually, let me dig it out because it's a good name. Stella G. And it's called Divine Moments of Trump. See, aren't you glad I searched for the name? Because it's pretty good. So yeah, that is our man. He's puking over there. Then we have Kim Jong-un and Mr. Putin. They're all searching for their souls in the jungle. Let's hope they find them. All right, so that's my slideshow. And now let me just shut this off here. Now we're going to bring on Mr. Mark McCloud. And all right, ladies and gentlemen, Mark McCloud, the man, the myth. Hey, Mark, how does it feel after all these years of blotter collecting at this point?
Well, you wake up one day, you're convinced you're dreaming, and that's okay. It's still real. It's just a dream.
You know, I was thinking about let's see, what part of the story do I want to... Let's talk about the first show, your decision to make an art, like since we're in an art gallery, how and when did you decide to first show this stuff in a gallery? And why were you crazy enough to do that back then?
It's just part of your job as an artist, is you notice whatever your society's kind of missing a beat at, and you're just pointing it out.
Can people hear him? You got to eat the mic a little more.
Okay.
Sorry, boss.
But that's all. You're just doing your artistic job, which is you're criticizing your social group. Mm-hmm. And so then, I had a death rebirth experience on LSD, and I thought a good way to thank it for that second chance at life would be to try to correct some of the misconceptions about it.
Yeah, that's always struck me about your motivations. Is it's not just about the other people involved, but it's also about LSD itself.
Yeah, that's all.
And even the phrase, you might want to explain to people, why did you come up with the term vanity blotter? What is the vanity part?
Well, it's a vain concern of blotter to be admired for something other than its content. And if you're going to assume you're acid laden, you're really full of vanity. And so the vanity blotter, which is just paying homage to the acid-soaked blotter, has to be the vanity to the real blotter.
There you go. But
that's not my problem.
No. I'm surprised. The term caught, though. That's what people call it, mostly.
Well, that's what it is.
Excellent.
Blessing soap stuff, even though yours isn't soap.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's a sacred dimension to the images on the blotter paper, or do you think that's the wrong?
The Chapel of the Miracle.
What's that?
The first psychedelic test on the public, which is at Harvard.
Oh, or the Marsh Chapel, yeah.
Yeah. And what were the results? 100 students, 50 placebos, and 50 live ones, and 75% of them drip. So 20. So half of the blanks were. So half of the vanities were.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the conversations we have in the book is we talk about the relationship between the blotter and the communion wafer.
Well, that's really what happened.
Yeah, well, tell your story when you're young. That's a good story.
No, the story's everyone's story that had to confess to earn a wafer, and if you And if you confess and you promised a wafer, you expect a wafer that works.
Yeah, because you were when you were a kid, yeah.
And all your friends are faking rapture around you, you know that you're going to look for where they've hidden the real one.
So that sets you on the quest, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's all it is once you find it, you know what the host is like. You know? Until you have the real one, you don't know what you're missing.
You know, one of the things that has been interesting also is all the different ways that you have been able to get your hands on street blotter. So the stuff that's designed to
Like
disappear.
anything here, if you concentrate on anything here strongly enough, it'll be drawn to you like an old bad radio station.
Yeah. And people would bring, you know, like you'd get like a message, like someone's going to bring you something, and then they bring a bag in the middle of the night, or not talk to you, or.
Some of these, the actual artists that have seen the collection think that I would, that I must have lived next door and checked their dumpster every night before going to bed, because, you know, I've just been lucky to find the cachets.
Absolutely, and wasn't there one set that was like in a guitar case from the early '70s?
Oh, yeah, think of the many guitar cases that have not been discovered yet.
Are you still getting interesting street stuff?
Any good collector will tell you their want list is much bigger than their have list.
But are there still things showing up at this point in the game that are like from back in the day that are old?
Of course.
All right.
Of course. And the new stuff that's even better, like the new Rolling Stones acid that I just saw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Or the new Teddy Kennedy, 100 hits of Let's Save Democracy. That's on the street right now. You know, what are you gonna do?
That's great. So it's kind of like it's
really
memeified, yeah.
There's new stuff going on all the time.
Well, do people still make artists still make nice editions that are designed solely to be street blotter?
As nice as nice gets, Eric.
That's an interesting one, though. What's their motivation? Since you can go and make.
What is eternal life? That's always the motivation. Eternal life's the motivation in that question too.
That's true. It does seem to keep coming up.
So if you do it right and you do it forever, it's much better than doing it wrong forever.
Okay, I think I'm running out here, so
That's the ultimate goal: is you want the rapture, you want the eternal, the promise given to you of ascertaining and redefining your immortality.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's ultimately it's the mortal confrontation that's part of the picture?
That's how you win the ticket here.
That's how you win the ticket here?
That's how you get to come here.
Is by what?
That's the deal.
You're right.
All or nothing.
All or nothing. And then acid can help you grapple and remember that condition?
It helped me.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it by collecting it and promoting it as a possibility to someone that might like to see something different,
Mm-hmm.
experience something different. That's all.
Yep.